Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation, Saving the World with Patents. Is the TRIPS waiver helping or hurting innovation? I'm Shelley Sombrio, Senior Business Development Manager at LexisNexis IP, and I'd like to cover a few things before we get started. During the webinar, please feel free to submit questions using the questions feature in the control panel. Also in the control panel, you will see a handout section. This is where you can access files pertaining to today's webinar, including the webinar slides. A follow-up email of the recording from today's presentation will be sent to you tomorrow, so look out for that. And now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. With us today, we have Melissa Brand and Brian Arthur Pomper, who will be more introduced by Jean shortly. Also joining today is Dr. Sarbani Chattopadhyay, who is a computational biologist with a PhD in biochemistry from the University of Calcutta in India and a master's in European IP and IT law from the University of Göttingen in Germany. As a consultant at LexisNexis IP, Sarbani works with clients all across the globe in different technology fields, specializing in searching and analyzing patents, patent landscape and technologies from a patent perspective. And last but certainly not least, we have Jean Quinn. Jean is the founder of IPWatchdog.com, a patent attorney, law professor, and leading commentator on patent law and innovation policy. Jean has been named one of the world's leading IP strategists by IAM Magazine. Thank you, everyone, for attending today's presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Jean.
Thanks a lot, Shelley, and thank you all for being here today and joining us for this very important conversation. And I'm pleased to be joined by two friends of mine, Melissa Brand and Brian Pomper. Brian is I suppose you're a lobbyist. I think that's fair to say, right? Brian has been working on Capitol Hill for a number of years. He has tremendous experience in international trade. He's a former chief counsel for international trade to the Senate Finance Committee, and international trade is his bailiwick. He also specializes in intellectual property for Aiken Gump. He represents companies and associations dealing with international trade and intellectual property at the agencies and at the White House and before Congress. And he just has a wealth of information and knowledge on this particular issue. And Melissa Brand is Assistant General Counsel for the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, better known simply as BIO. And she represents thousands of biotech and pharmaceutical companies with respect to their intellectual property. BIO is a trade organization. And obviously, the TRIPS agreement is extremely important to the BIO membership since it is potentially waiving the cures that they've come up with, the vaccines relating to COVID. So we've had a conversation amongst ourselves over this for months leading up to this decision by the Biden administration. So we decided to have this webinar to talk about what's going on and what might be going on and whether it matters and whether it's good or bad. So thank you for joining us here today. Let's flip to the next slide, Sarbani, if we can. And before we move any further, what I'd like to do is obviously, number one, thank LexisNexis for letting us have this conversation. Number one, LexisNexis has been a great sponsor of ours for a very long time. And this is I suppose in some ways a little bit of an unusual webinar, right? Because we're going to get to talk about a extremely cutting edge issue, very topical, hard hitting. We're going to do a lot of analysis, and that's the type of thing LexisNexis allows me to do often. So I really appreciate LexisNexis sponsorship. The other thing I want to point out to you here, and I'm going to just cover this very quickly. We're going to get into some PatentSight statistics and analytics here that are going to take a look at the patent portfolios of companies that have been working in the vaccine space relating specifically to mRNA technologies and vaccines associated with COVID, well, let's call it COVID technologies, because it's the COVID vaccine, but COVID technologies meaning all of the technologies that led up to ultimately successful COVID vaccines. Now, the PatentSight data we have done an entire webinar just on the validity of that data and only scratched the surface of it. It's an open source algorithms. They've been vetted by the European Commission, who relies on PatentSight for mergers and acquisitions analysis when they're looking at companies merging to see whether or not their patent portfolio and their footprint is going to be too large and they're going to control a dominant position. So it's very well understood and open source, and I guess its rigors and bona fides are well accepted in the industry. If you have any questions about how they did this and what they did here and what algorithms or assumptions or equations are used, they're more than happy to go through that with you and provide that information to you. But we're going to really focus on the output of the analysis and not how we got to the data in this particular webinar. So please follow up with them if you have any questions about how the data was obtained. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Sarbani because she's got a number of, or we have a poll question first to gauge your knowledge and opinion of this. So Ali, if you could push that. Do you support the TRIPS waiver? A pretty simple, straightforward question. So we're approaching half of the audience having voted, over half the audience having voted. Okay, and the output here is we have almost 70% saying no and 30% saying yes. For a webinar here like this, on this platform, that's a bit higher on the yeses than I would have expected. But let's go through and talk about the data underlying what's going on, and then we'll come back and see if you all still support the waiver or not. Sarbani.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be able to, excuse me, to be able to present, as Jean said, the connection between the vaccines that are currently have reached the market or potentially will reach the market, and if we can trace them back to the patents. So we are talking about vaccine. Vaccine is a medium by which body's immune system is allowed to identify a foreign agent, a foreign sort of a, what should I say, a foreign element that can cause harm to the body. This is a way in which body's immune system is prepared so that when there's an actual attack by the pathogen, the body is prepared. So prophylactic vaccines are the ones that are generally used for prevention of diseases. We are concentrating on them for today. Before we move ahead, as Jean said, we have done the analysis in LexisNexis PatentSight. First of all, we have defined the field very broadly to define and to retrieve the patents that are in the field of vaccines against the viruses. So first of all, we started with the all kind of patents that have been filed over the years, where the invention relates to vaccines that are against any kind of virus. Any kind of virus is what we started with. So not only the viruses that causes pandemic, but also the ones that are still there is no cure for them. For example, the HIV virus, the hepatitis virus, they are also included. What we see here is in the graph is the filing statistics graph, which is the filing all across the world. And in each year, how many patent families have been filed. We would like to draw your attention to few years, which were the years where there was an outbreak of a virus and there was a pandemic out of it. Before I even move over and identify the viruses that caused the pandemic in these years, what I would like to draw your attention to is that after every year in which there was a pandemic, the filing statistics of the patents in this field of viral vaccines went up. Once these pandemics hit the world, the filing never went back to the quantity that was prior to these pandemics. What we want to point out here is that while there are researches and patenting activity going on in the field of vaccines against all kind of viruses. Whenever there is a immediate response required, there has not only been the R&D, but also increased filing activity such that the R&D has reached the market through patents. If I can draw the attention to the years, so these are the viruses that hit in each year. So 2002, it was SARS, followed by the bird flu, the swine flu, the MERS. Ebola took a long time before it could be even it could be brought back under control. And 2019, December, it's the time of the outbreak of COVID-19. While we got this first insight, what we also understood is that there is a common factor between among these viruses that we have seen over the years regarding the filing statistics. All these viruses, they cover one kind of disease which we call zoonosis. This is the definition given by the World Health Organization. So the pathogens, that can be bacteria, that can be virus, that can be any kind of parasite, that can jump from non-human animals to humans are the ones that cause these kind of diseases. So zoonosis is the common factor among this. What we did was we narrowed this down to the viruses that are causing these zoonotic diseases, and we tried to find out if we can get some relevant patents that can be useful to be able to contribute to combat today's current pandemic. When we did that, we already start with this idea that the broad definition, when we find that we see that the ones that we retrieve, the patent owning entities here, we find them by this broad definition, ranked by, as Jean said, RKPI, the Patent Asset Index, which is the quality indicator at the portfolio level. Some of the patent owning entities that we find are already in the news. So Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, CureVac, Moderna, Pfizer, also GlaxoSmithKline, Sanofi, we find them already as relevant patent owning entities in this broad field that we have defined. What it tells us is that if they have patents in this field, that means they have the know-how to be able to contribute in case they are required to contribute in this field. Once we move ahead, we start with this knowledge already that the virus, the SARS, the MERS, the SARS-CoV-2, they all belong to the coronaviridae family. They are characterized by this particular appearance. These are the spike proteins that are found at the surface. They anchored themselves on the host human cells through these spike proteins. So we can definitely expect that this spike protein can be used as a medium to generate immunogenic response within the body. So this can be used as a subunit, and it can be combined with adjuvants, the boosters, so that when they are introduced into the body, they can allow the body to be able to recognize this as something that that should make antibodies against and thus have immunity against. These spike proteins can be introduced through the encoding through vectors. They can also be conjugated with other subunits, pathogens, and introduced into the body. And they can also be encoded by nucleic acids. And the most fundamental procedure of using the entire inactive vaccine, inactive virus introduced into the body can also be followed. So we already start with this idea that the spike protein can be a very important and a relevant medium for generating immunity in the body against the coronavirus. We take you through the patents that we have retrieved for each of the patent owning entities that we saw in the list. And we try to show you how closely related their research, their patents are to what they have actually done currently. Our first focus is Johnson & Johnson. When we look into PatentSight's glimpse, the result list, when we can look into the patents, this is a glimpse of the patents that we have retrieved based on the field that we have defined and our KPI. These are the Johnson & Johnson patents. First thing that we can see is Johnson & Johnson has been involved in researching and patenting in the field of SARS coronavirus since long. So the virus that they have, the vaccine that they have brought in today, they just didn't do it overnight. There has been a huge body of work since 2005 and probably earlier than that in this field of SARS. What I would also like to point out is another particular patent where they have around the same time, that means around the time of after the SARS outbreak. This is what Johnson & Johnson has brought to the world, and this is an enforced patent where the adenovirus vector is being used as the medium to carry the pathogen or the subunit. And this is their proprietary product. They have disclosed in the patent that they're protecting that the adenovirus has been taken from the group AD11, AD26, and others. In the claims, they have mentioned that the viral antigen that will be carried by encoded by this adenovirus vector is the Ebola virus, measles, West Nile, and others. If we look into the current news, the vaccine that Johnson & Johnson has brought into the world, it is based on the replication incompetent adenovirus type 26. We already saw that it is in the patent that they are protecting, and it is encoding for the spike protein. So cumulative effect of everything that Johnson & Johnson had been doing since long has been able to enable it to bring this vaccine to the market. We move ahead to our next focus, which is very interesting, which is Novavax. Novavax, when we look into the patents that we have retrieved, we find that, yes, the trend is the same. This is a particular patent of Novavax that was first filed in 2014, and it is against the MERS virus. I would like you to look into the details of this patent. This is a special patent and special type of technology where nanoparticles are being used to introduce the subunit of the MERS virus. And they have also mentioned that they are using an adjuvant, the adjuvant that is comprising of lipid and saponin. And the saponin they have obtained from these. One of this is Quillaja saponaria. And obviously they have mentioned that this is for making the body to use antibodies so that MERS-CoV can be neutralized. This is Novavax's patented proprietary adjuvant product, Matrix M. This discloses that it is a nanoparticle and it comprises of saponin, which has been extracted from Quillaja saponaria, as we see here, and it is combined with cholesterol and phospholipid, which was also disclosed in the patent. If we come to the news, and when we are speaking, they have already presented their results, and they are very good results, thankfully for the entire world. This is again a protein-based vaccine, and it has been based on the recombinant nanoparticle technology, and it has the adjuvant, which is Novavax's patented adjuvant, Matrix M, which is saponin-based. The good news is that, and I would like to point this out, and this is we should all be very happy about, the virus is undergoing mutations, its strategy for survival, and there are COVID-19 variants in UK and South Africa. Novavax has demonstrated this level of efficiency in the phase 3 trial. The war is not over, even our weapons are not over. So this is a good news, and this news is patented. We move over to Sanofi. Sanofi and GSK are also in the news. We see if we can get something of a news or something of a insight based on this or not. The same trend continues. We see that they have been involved against SARS virus and based on a baculovirus vector. When we move ahead to GSK, we find that GSK is also involved in vaccines. Their adjuvant is special. It's oil and water emulsion. So this is a difference against the influenza virus, but the adjuvant is oil in water. When we look into one details, we see that the adjuvant, it has a metabolizable oil, alpha tocopherol emulsifying agent, and the metabolizable oil is choline. When we look into the details, we find this is again a proprietary product of GlaxoSmithKline. This comprises of ASO3, which is a squalene-based immunologic adjuvant. It comprises tocopherol, squalene, and polysorbate, the emulsifying agent. What Sanofi and GlaxoSmithKline are bringing to the market is again a spike protein-based vaccine, which is based on baculovirus expression, and the adjuvants are this, as well as ASO3, which is GlaxoSmithKline's proprietary product, as we discussed. Having said all this, when all this gets over, this will be remembered as the landmark achievement in vaccine development. This is the first time that mRNA-based vaccine has been administered into the human body. Starting from the days of inactivated vaccine, days of the oral polio vaccine that had to be stopped at one point of time, till the point of using nucleic acids, much more safe method of vaccine, where the code is in the mRNA or the DNA. This is the first time it has been possible to use this vaccine and administer it into the human beings. When we did this mRNA-based vaccine technology analysis in PatentSight, and we generated the patent portfolio ranking using the average quality of the patents versus the quantity, we retrieved the ones which are already in the news, like Moderna, CureVac, BioNTech. So we know that they have been doing research and they have been trying to protect their invention through patents as we see them here. What also comes out when we use patent analytics are the hidden players as well. Moderna, CureVac, BioNTech, they are in the forefront. The hidden player is Arbutus. It has much fewer patents as BioNTech, Moderna, and CureVac. It ranks higher when we take into the average quality as per our KPI. The mRNA platform that Arbutus possesses as a proprietary product is crucial not only for BioNTech, but also for Moderna. Both the mRNA vaccines have been possible because the mRNA platform was available from Arbutus. BioNTech had licensed it. Moderna was involved in a legal battle. Now they settled it. So everything that I showed today are based on the information that we get from patents. I would like to believe, and I do believe with full conviction, that we are a very good analysis tool. But LexisNexis PatentSight is a third-party analysis tool based on publicly available data. The fact that we could correlate and we could directly provide the link between what is actually in the society, what has already reached the market, and what is invented, what is researched upon, is highlighting one of the fundamental pillars, or I should say the procedure in patents. The trade-off between the patent owner and the society for a limited period of time, a protection for a limited period of time, in lieu or in trade-off of complete disclosure. Had they not done that, we could not have shown you these results. So I'm happy that I could show these results and I could show how science has been able to bring a remedy to what we are right now all affected by.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarbani. Now, before we do the next poll question, let's bring in Brian and Melissa and get some thoughts here on what this actually means before we see if anybody's mind has actually been changed. Because we're going to essentially ask you the same question again, but we're going to ask it and say, in light of everything that we've talked about so far, do you still support or are you still against the TRIPS waiver? So Melissa and Brian, Melissa first, Brian, I'll ask you the same exact question. From your point of view, what do you think that all of this means, and what do you want people to know as we pivot into the, the legal, political, international trade conversation that will take us through the rest of the hour?
Sure, thank you, Gene, and thank you for having me today to talk about this very important topic. A couple of points. So I think what we see here is there is a lot of patent IP in this space. And what we also know is there are 11 approved vaccines out there. There have been over 250 collaborations relating to research and development and manufacturing associated with those vaccines. So we know that IP is playing a role in helping get technology out there, getting actual products for people. And there are no credible instances where IP has actually held up the production or research and development of any of these products. What I can say, though, is that the IP waiver threatens the possibility of that going forward in the future. And I'll try to just make 2 points on this. First, We know that these companies have been able to produce these new vaccines in incredible speed. And a lot of that is due to all of the collaborations that have been going on. But in order to have such collaborations, you have to have IP rights. And we're talking more broadly here than just patents. We're talking about trade secrets, manufacturing know-how, regulatory data protection. When you have those in place and you can rely on them, then you can collaborate with people because you know how to order your affairs, you know how to enter into contracts, and you know how to divide up future rights. With an IP waiver, it's hard to understand how in the next instance such relationships and contractual agreements could be formed when at the end of the day you would have agreed on something with your partners and then all of a sudden governments step in and take those rights away. Similarly, if you are a company and you are thinking about getting into the space where you might want to, develop a vaccine for the next pandemic, let's say you have some of this platform technology or existing technology that could possibly be used to develop a new vaccine in this space. With the threat of an IP waiver, why would you take your platform technology and try to solve the next problem if you know that at the end of the day, a government may step in and take your rights not only over that existing product, but your platform technologies that can have other applications? So I think what we see here is the development of IP is a long process. It's not that everybody just invented something in 2020 to solve this crisis. And when you start doing things like waiving IP rights, especially after companies have invested time, resources, they've shelved other projects that they had in the development stages. When you start doing things like that, it's hard to see how the innovation would work as quickly and smoothly and successfully the next time we have a pandemic.
Yeah, those are great points, and we're going to come back and dive more deeply into some of those. Brian, from your perspective, what do you want folks to focus on preliminarily?
All right, thanks, Gene, and let me echo the thanks for having me here. I usually joke, I rarely give up the opportunity to hear myself talk, so thank you for giving me that opportunity once again. I guess I would just start, and we really all should start by saying, this is a human tragedy on a monumental scale, right? There are people getting sick and dying all over the world, in countries all over the world, and by all means, countries should be doing everything they can that's going to have a real impact on helping those people. I think what the critics will say is that the TRIPS waiver will not really have an impact, certainly not on this pandemic, and actually could be harmful, as Melissa says, towards addressing future pandemics. I think there's a lot that I could say at the outset. I think and we'll get into some of this, but I think one of the questions that people sometimes will ask me is, well, what does this actually mean in practice? What does the TRIPS waiver mean? And I think sometimes people assume a TRIPS waiver means that automatically all of this intellectual property is available for use in whatever country it wants to. And it's a little more complicated than that. First, it bears noting, and it is actually a very important point, we're not just talking about patents, right? The patents are not even really the important part, right? Because the patents are public, right? That's the trade-off when you get a patent. It's really the know-how and the trade secrets that are not publicly known that is really, I think, the topic that we're really talking about here. That's the real information, I think, that is being discussed. What the waiver does is it removes the umbrella of protection of the United States for any country that would then seek to get this intellectual property. And so the question is, well, then how does that happen? If it's not the patents, because we've already got the ability to compulsory license under the TRIPS agreement, how does one then get the know-how or the trade secrets that really just exist in the mind of the people manufacturing this? And the answer is each country will have to pass its own domestic legislation or issue its own executive orders or decrees or whatever the system is. And that could be pretty messy depending on how the countries plan to do it. And you could see a circumstance where you've got multiple countries demanding similar information or even conflicting information at the same time in a way that it will be very hard for some of these companies to, I think, to meet. So I guess I would just say that at the outset. There's also very important foreign policy aspects here that we should discuss, but I won't go into those here now. We can discuss throughout the conversation.
Yeah, so we have a question. Thanks, Brian. We have a question here about the details. If we could go into the details of the waiver, as I understand it, the waiver would apply to all IP, both patents and trade secrets, like Brian said. The current proposal is that it would last for 3 years, I believe, and it would relate to vaccine technology. But that the way that the WTO works is, as has been explained to me, is on a consensus basis. So that if in fact there is no consensus, then the waiver could last really indefinitely, which is a concern. And then as we see through Sharbani's presentation, how do you define the COVID vaccine technology? You know, the COVID vaccine technology relates to Ebola, it relates to MERS, it relates to SARS, it relates to all kinds of different vaccines. Pretty much every vaccine that of relevance or significance over the last 15 years or 20 years is baked into these COVID vaccines. So where is the limitation on the technology? And then the last thing that really gets to me, and because I fundamentally personally think there's a right answer here, and that the waiver is wrong. The waiver is not supported by TRIPS because the waiver will do nothing. Because by the time the waiver is finally negotiated and all of the writing is done, the pandemic will be under control. We'll have 10 to 20 billion extra doses of the vaccine by the time the waiver language is finalized. And by the time manufacturing facilities are built and the governments have created the laws to require the trade secret release and so forth, the COVID will be a distant memory. So this particular waiver for quote unquote COVID vaccine related technology or intellectual property will have no effect on COVID whatsoever. So for me, it's just a grab at intellectual property. So I'd like to get Brian and Melissa to comment on that. Is that, am I too strong? Am I not strong enough? Was that a fair summary? Brian first.
Yeah, let me take the WTO aspects of that first, and then I'll kick it to Melissa for more of the substance. First, I think just to correct something, Gene, that the waiver as drafted actually applies not just to vaccines, but also to therapeutics and PPEs and copyrights, other things as well. So it's pretty broadly written.
So it's even broader than what I suggested.
It is, yeah. Okay. It was proposed originally by India and South Africa. A bunch of developing countries have come on board. There are also some developed countries that have now voiced support for the waiver, like France in particular and others. However, there are quite a few countries. Of course, the United States, I should hasten to add, the United States has not expressed support for the waiver as drafted by India and China. The United States has said we should have a waiver for COVID vaccines. And I really hasten to add that because USTR has been very careful in its public statements always to say the waiver that they support is one for vaccines, as opposed to all the other things that are included in the India and South Africa waiver. And that's an interesting political spot for USTR because they're getting, and USTR, of course, is the U.S. trade representative that is in charge of trade policy. They are being criticized on the left by activist groups for not going far enough because they're only talking about vaccines. And of course, they're being attacked on the right and by many in the business for having agreed to the waiver in the first place. You're right, the WTO operates by consensus. Typically, there is a voting mechanism. And in fact, the waiver that's being negotiated is being negotiated under the auspices of a particular paragraph in the WTO agreements that allows a vote. I think it's by 3/4 of the, or no, I'm sorry. Well, I'm going to mix this up here, but basically there could be a vote. Mm-hmm. The truth of the matter is the WTO system does not work by voting. It's always by consensus. And the reason why is that if you start voting you're going to lose a certain degree of sovereignty, and it will really threaten the entirety of the system.
Right.
Typically, the way it works is that you have groups of countries that operate in kind of like wolf packs. You know, it's not common that one country will hold up everything. It's usually groups of countries. It's a little bit how the Senate operates actually in the United States. It operates by unanimous consent. And it's much easier for several senators to stop something as opposed to just one senator standing. And it's kind of like that. So typically a group of countries that will follow one another and try to direct the course of discussion.
Oh, did Brian freeze for you guys?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I just looks like I just dropped a little bit. So the folks who are supporting the TRIPS waiver targeted the United States specifically to encourage the United States to support the waiver, because often it is the United States that leads these discussions at the World Trade Organization supporting intellectual property rights. And you'd have other trading blocs like the EU and Japan and Korea and others would kind of draft behind the United States and kind of me too, whatever the United States said. So the folks supporting the waiver targeted the United States to get them to agree to the waiver, thinking that you'd then have those other trading blocs would then quickly follow suit. I think many trade observers like me are a little surprised, to be candid, that even when the United States said, yes, we support the TRIPS waiver, the EU, Germany especially, Japan, Korea, Switzerland, there's a whole variety of countries, trading blocs, who remain pretty steadfast against any waiver, really. Now, they've agreed to allow negotiations to take place, and that's the way the WTO works, is you've got to agree even on the agenda, you know, what happens, what's being discussed. So they're agreeing to allow those negotiations to go forward. But if you parse what they say pretty carefully, it seems to me that they're willing to discuss. And the EU has even put forward a separate proposal that just, I think, reiterates the availability of the existing flexibilities under TRIPS without posing any waiver or idea for any waiver here. And if you look pretty carefully at what these countries are saying, it feels to me like we are a long way away from an agreement with the WTO on a TRIPS waiver. The last thing
go ahead.
Is important. The Director General of the WTO has said we want to have an agreement on a waiver by December 3rd, which is the last day of the upcoming ministerial. Ministerials happen usually every 2 years. This one is in Geneva, and she's hoping to have it done by December 3rd. If I'm a betting person, I say they won't get it by December 3rd, and it will take a lot longer than that.
Yeah, and the longer it takes, the more irrelevant it becomes, at least as a COVID waiver, you know, right?
Melissa will know better. As I understand it, it would take 11 billion doses to vaccinate 70% of the world, I think. And I think that the industry has been saying that the industry in the United States will have 11 billion doses by the end of this year available for use by everybody in the world.
Yeah. Well, Melissa, before I get to you, Brian, let me follow up with you 1 minute here. And Melissa, I'd like you to maybe also try and comment on this too. We do have somebody says, thus far, we're only hearing about the detrimental effects of the waiver. Can somebody say what the perceived benefits would be? Now, I did type a response, and I mean, my response to this person was, the problem is there really aren't any benefits other than countries being able to take the IP of private corporations. And that's, I truly believe that. I mean, because I don't see how this, if the goal is in under TRIPS, this is the goal as I understand it. These waivers and licenses exist for extraordinary situations dealing with medical health crisis, life-saving situations to save people's lives, right? This is not going to save anybody's life, because by the time this would get enacted, by the time this would get passed, go all the way through, the industry will have long since solved this issue. And so that was what makes it irrelevant, and that's why I only see it as a grab at the IP. And what is the other side? I mean, what I hear from the other side is, if not now, when? And I just think that, well, if this was going to help, if this was going to get any shots in arms quicker, then okay, let's have that conversation. But that's not going to happen, is it, Brian?
Yeah, look, I would just say that the folks who are supporting the waiver, exactly. I mean, they point to the truly unusual and unique nature of this pandemic. I mean, and that's a true thing. But I think, Gene, you're right. When you dig down deeper into the substance, the question is, well, then how will this waiver help? What they will say is, well, there is some spare manufacturing capacity in certain places around the world. I think that's debatable, to be candid. And I'm trying to be very even-handed here. I don't want to put my thumb in this guy. I'm just telling you kind of what I hear. I'm really more reporting. That's really what I hear from the folks supporting the waivers. There's a company in Canada that wants to do this. They've actually applied for a compulsory license from Bolivia, I believe, to be able to manufacture, I think it's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So there are instances where the supporters are pointing to, but I think that the question maybe for this panel or for policymakers generally is, are there real benefits, immediate benefits to people who are suffering? And what are the trade-offs and costs in going down this road for future patients and future pandemics? And that's really, I think, Melissa, you're probably pretty well suited to talk about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think the question is the future pandemics, not this one. And we have some people saying that if this waiver were to happen, people in other regions would get vaccines, but that's just not factually true, is it, Melissa?
I don't think so. Not in any reasonable amount of time. So I think, to try to put this nicely, there have been other policies in place that have made it more difficult for certain countries to get vaccine doses as quickly as other countries. For example, export restrictions. So by pointing at IP, it sort of takes the attention off certain other policies that have been in place that could have maybe potentially gotten doses to those lower and more middle income countries more quickly. So one of the main problems that we have with getting vaccine doses out is actually supply chain problems, right? The materials that go into making vaccines are not ubiquitous. Actually, one of the biggest problems they have are just bags and other plastic equipment that's even required to make these vaccines. So the notion that all of a sudden we should have a bunch of people all over the world who've never made these brand new vaccines, especially the ones using brand new technology that have never been used before, and those people can get the supply materials that are needed to make high quality vaccines, what you're gonna end up doing is threatening the overall supply of vaccine, right? You have a set of companies now who have been approved by several regulatory agencies to make high quality products. They can't even get all of the materials that they need. Why would you then start giving those materials to other people who've never made an mRNA vaccine or an adenovirus vector vaccine, right? It's not going to be helpful. Also, everybody needs to remember that when a new company makes a vaccine, they still have to go through clinical trials. Like, you can't just start selling that vaccine, right? You have to test it in humans. So that takes more time. It subjects more people to potentially not getting a good vaccine. And then ultimately it would have to be approved by a regulatory agency, which takes more time as well. I think it was mentioned before, but I'll just reiterate, the current projections are that the approved vaccine manufacturers should have between 10 and 11 billion doses by the end of the year. Many of these companies have, independent of any contracts with governments, they've pledged over 1 billion of doses to the COVAX facility, which is responsible for helping get vaccine doses to lower and middle income countries. So that is just saying there are so many reasons why waiving IP is not going to help, right? You have your supply chain problems, you have quality, you have the question about whether they could even ever potentially make these vaccines. And the question is, why would you do that when you have the industry sitting here saying we have enough doses, we will give them to you? And it's a good question why the waiver was suggested. And I think, you know, Brian made some good points on that. And I think, honestly, there's a good chance it was to try to take some attention off other policies that made it harder to get vaccine doses to lower and more middle income countries.
So the comments are blowing up, and there's at least one person in particular that's very agitated. But let's assume that this person is probably representative of what some people are thinking, because I've heard this, I've seen it, we see it on TV, right? In the ads, right? I mean, what I'm basically hearing is essentially denial of the facts and saying, oh well, there is no shortage in the supply chain, or anybody can make those supply chain materials. Oh, you don't need to have high grade medical equipment or specific equipment in order to make these. And it seems to me like there's a lot of just fundamental disbelief as to what is required in order to do this undertaking. And Melissa, could you give us to your best an explanation as to what is required to do this? And I'm stuttering because I'm trying to form the question. What I've read is, so I'll plant the seed, maybe I'll lead you a little bit and see if this is right. What I have read is that in order to make one of these vaccines at a facility, you need dozens, if not hundreds, of highly skilled PhDs working in concert together, plus all of the supply chain equipment, plus the facility. And so the thought that these things can be done just anywhere by anybody is really, it's a fantasy. So when you see these commercials that say, oh well, this could be done anywhere, we need to let people do this, it's really just misleading people. Is that a fair statement, or what did I get wrong there?
No, well, I don't know if they all have to be PhDs in order to be some part of the manufacturing process. But what a good example is, we all know that there was a US-based company that was supposed to be helping manufacture one of the approved vaccines in the US. And that company, who is regulated by the US FDA, was not able to do a proper quality job in manufacturing those vaccines, and had to stop manufacturing for a while, right? And the government had to step in. I think maybe it's been resolved by now. I honestly haven't followed up on it, but the fact that a US-based respectable company had trouble doing this is very illustrative of the fact that, no, you can't just convert some chip facility sitting somewhere that has never manufactured a vaccine before. You can't just convert that into a clean space and take people who have never done this type of technology before and start manufacturing vaccines. I will also say, to the extent that there's arguments out there like, oh, we have facilities out there that manufacture these other vaccines for other, illnesses that kill millions of people per year, we should stop manufacturing those vaccines there and convert them to COVID vaccines. That's kind of crazy, because people still need the vaccines that they've been getting all along, right? We don't want to cause another problem by converting that space, which even that would take a significant amount of time and money, as I understand it.
Right.
So,
the cure can't be worse than the disease, right? I mean, so
exactly.
Yeah.
And then I will say another point is that this is the first time mRNA vaccines have been approved, right? So I don't think that people who haven't succeeded in doing that can suddenly start opining on how easy it would be for other people to adopt that technology and start making vaccines using that technology when nobody else has ever been able to do it before.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we should now push this poll question again to see, as we go towards the last final 10 minutes, whether we've changed anybody's mind at all here. Wow. Well, I got to say, you guys did a hell of a job. That's a big change in just 30 minutes. 88% say they're not in favor of the TRIPS waiver, and now 12% say they still are. So that's a significant change. That's almost 20% drop. That's a 19% drop.
Yeah,
And so,
just to be clear though, Gene, I guess I'm not trying to convince anybody on this. I mean,
no, I know. I know you're not. And
I think
the way I presented that was unfair, and I apologize. I mean,
I just want to say, like, I think everybody wants to try to do the right thing for people who are suffering, and we want to try
Right.
to, I mean, everybody wants to do that. And there are some people who believe that the TRIPS waiver is one of the things to do that, and there are people who don't. And I think there are things that we can focus on, like Melissa mentioned, export controls, making sure the supply chain is robust, getting US companies who are manufacturing this stuff now, getting them everything they need so they can get these vaccines out there now. I mean, to me,
Right.
I feel like that's the best thing we can do right now in the short term for people that are suffering now.
So, and I agree 100%. And that's a good place. Maybe we should pivot because, and I didn't mean to be quite so cavalier, because I personally, I want this thing to be over and I want people to get better. And a lot of my writing over the years has been very upset at people who want to always use TRIPS and the conditions of TRIPS to break patents, because I fundamentally think that hurts more people than it helps. And this, I just believe with all my heart, is not going to do any good at all. And if you do take away these incentives, because look, the whole world, the whole technology world, they came together. If you recall, let's recall for a second, there were conversations at the very beginning of this about whether or not the Trump administration was going to have to go after some of these companies for antitrust violations because they were collaborating with one another. And I don't know whether they ever got to the point of collaborating that closely that it would be an antitrust violation. But if you recall, the Justice Department said very early on, hey, no, we're not planning, we're not going to go after, collaborate. And they did. The whole industry worldwide worked together. IP did not do anything other than help. The IP that they had been going back, as Sarbani pointed out, all the way back to 2004 or 5 in this study, worked together to create these vaccines. And let's just be honest, we had vaccines not within a year. We had vaccines within several months, because these vaccines that wound up being approved and put in people's arms as approved provisionally by the FDA were put in people's arms within a few months to test. So this was just so fast, and it worked. This worked. This is a success story, for God's sake. So to sit here, and I get really worked up about this, and I think we should say, look, this is the model for the future, not what can we do to break this down and it didn't work fast enough for the world. Well, there's always going to be somebody that gets the shot first, and there's always going to be somebody that gets the shot last. And unless you can simultaneously give everybody the shot, that's just the way it's going to happen. And I personally think what the U.S. should have done, and what the industrialized countries should have done, was say, by the end of this year, we're going to have 11 billion vaccines. We don't need 11 billion vaccines for our countries. The governments, rather than putting it on the backs of the innovative companies to lose their trade secrets and patents, we are going to pay, we're going to buy those vaccines and we're going to donate them to these countries, rather than try and force these countries to set up their own manufacturing facilities and so forth. I think that's the solution that gets shots in arms faster.
And in fact, I think that's exactly what President Biden announced with the 500 million doses of Pfizer vaccines.
Right, and I think that's the right answer, and he should be applauded for doing that. Now we should go to the UK and say, okay, how many doses are you guys going to buy? And go to France, how many doses are you going to buy? And pretty soon you're going to get the industrialized world to vaccinate the whole world. And it's not going to be, it'll be on the backs of all tax-paying citizens around the world, rather than on the backs of a couple innovative companies that have been investing in this R&D for decades.
And I just want to add on to that. I agree with that, Gene, like very wholeheartedly. I think that sometimes in this discussion too, the infrastructure of some of these countries is not at the forefront of mind, right? When we talk to people in some of these countries, they say, it's not that we want your manufacturing technology. We want you to send people here to train people to administer the doses, right? We're talking about that level of infrastructure support in some of these areas where they just don't even have people who can administer the shots. Then talk about transporting these vaccines to places that don't have proper refrigeration. You know, all of the logistics of if it's a 2-shot regimen and it's a very rural area, you know, ensuring that people come back for their second dose, right? There are a lot of infrastructure problems here. And thinking that, oh, we'll just send over the most advanced vaccine technology and that is somehow going to get doses in arms, it really ignores the bigger picture for so many of these countries, especially where there are some of the biggest crises at the moment.
Yeah. Now, Sarbani, do you have any more slides that you would like to show us? I think you may have a couple more slides here.
Yeah, but they are also in the same direction. So I wanted to also show that when we started doing these kind of research at that point of time, we not only wanted to find out a broad definition, but also very specific definitions. Because as I said, we were expecting that the vaccines will be against somehow using the spike protein as the medium. So we narrowed it down specifically to the spike proteins and in the title and the abstract of the patents and combine them with the IPCs and the CPCs. I would like whoever has attended this webinar today to just have a look at the Innovio Pharma. Keep an eye on it. If mRNA is there, maybe DNA-based vaccine can also see the light of the day. Just a hint for that. What is interesting, and this is also something that probably should be now considered. So Oxford Innovation, the University of Oxford, when we retrieve this as a patent owning entity to be considered, sorry, this is another one, but I don't think that is what I wanted to speak on. So I'll just speak on it, then I will go to the other one that I have. This is the one where we found that Oxford Innovation, University of Oxford patent, what they have enforced is the patent where the adenoviral vector is being disclosed. What they had attempted in a PCT application was to patent their invention where they have used the ChAd-OX1 chimpanzee adenoviral vector against the MERS virus. Now, this was applied for in 2018, and they got their ISA report towards the end of 2020. This a patent application, which was pending at that point of time, it was no longer pursued by the University of Oxford. So that patent is not anymore ever will be protecting the invention, but the invention has been licensed, non-exclusive license by AstraZeneca. And that is the vaccine that has reached the world. So again, I would like to point out, if anybody is attempting to patent, the trade-off is sufficient disclosure of the invention. And even if they do not get the patent granted, that is enough for the invention to reach the market. And at this point of time, these things need to be considered when we are looking into patents. The other thing that I have is, I expected that when we got this, that people will be surprised when we showed the first slide where the patent owning entities in the broad field included Zetis. Now, most of us, if you don't know, they are not in the human pharmaceutical company. They are in the animal-based pharmaceutical company. And this is a news which, again, needs to be understood, that they are making an experimental vaccine that has not yet been approved in the USA in animals, but that has been now administered in the zoo on the orangutans. The reason is this is a zoonotic disease. More and more you allow the virus to live either in human or in animals, it will keep on mutating itself. You'll find more and more variants. It can jump from animals to humans, vice versa. So this is how whoever has any invention, any innovation, they are contributing so that we can put a stop to this virus. We can go back to our normal lives. And this, again, I would like to reiterate, they are because of the research that has been going on since long. And the patents reflect the research that has been going on since long. I don't know when we started, as I said, we started from a polio vaccine and we have reached up till here the nucleic acid vaccines. This entire thing, entire journey is through the incentivizing process of patenting. Putting a sudden end to it requirement of the society, but then also we should actually take into account that at least even for this pandemic, the research and the contribution was made by the ones who followed this process, this procedure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is all, there's so much innovation in this space, and I don't think we want to disrupt that. We do have, and I know we're at time, but we have one thing that was raised here. The premise that I've been talking about, at least I'll say, is the assumption that we'll get immunity from 2 shots. What if we need a booster shot yearly? And I think, and my understanding of the TRIPS situation is that TRIPS is for emergency scenarios, right? If there is appropriate manufacturing capacity and the industry is supplying this, then there is no need for a waiver to allow countries to do it on their own, right? I mean, I think people are wanting to just take the property and let the countries do it. It seems to me that there's this fundamental misunderstanding of what the waiver is about. Or maybe it's just that the belief that corporations shouldn't own the property and the countries ought to be able to take it. I don't really know, but you know, you need a booster shot for an awful lot of things. And if we're going to take the property away from the companies, then where does it end? I guess, you know, is it with the flu shot or with other things? And if we're going to do it here with the TRIPS waiver, then are we going to do it with respect to cancer treatments? I mean, I think cancer kills more people, or heart disease kills way more people than COVID has killed. You know, and climate change kills way more people a year than COVID has killed. You know, I mean, I just don't know where it ends, I guess.
Yeah, I know that there is a global effort for flu vaccination, and the name is escaping me at the moment, but for ongoing booster type vaccinations like that, there are models out there that seem to work very well, so that could be applied. But also, I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, there's been over 250 collaborations for research and development and manufacturing related to the COVID-19 vaccines. There's no reason to think at this point in time that if a booster is required, that those collaborations or additional ones couldn't handle it or materialize in a way that would handle it, especially when we have capacity already built up at this point. So I don't know if the waiver is supposed to apply to boosters. I think that the draft currently is probably silent on that. But given, you know, our success in the flu shot space and the significant capacity that we've seen so far developed for the 11 vaccines out there, it's hard for me to imagine a good argument why a waiver would be necessary for boosters going forward.
Mm-hmm. And Brian, I know we're at time here, but I want to give you one last opportunity can you tell people what this waiver is really intended for? I mean, what is what in a nutshell, when is it appropriate and what is it intended for?
Well, the easy answer and a little bit of a cop-out is the waiver is appropriate when the members agree on a waiver, right? Because they can agree to anything that they want to. I think when people talk about a waiver like this, it is an extraordinary measure, and it is intended for extraordinary times. And of course, these are extraordinary times, but it gets back to the fundamental question: is this waiver going to help people? And I think that's where you have people just disagreeing. You've got some people who think absolutely we should absolutely do it, and you've got some people who look at it and say, well, no, actually, I don't think it will, and could be harmful going forward. So there's nothing I mean, there's no specific guidelines in the context of TRIPS when a waiver should be granted. Mm-hmm. It just says that there are that the obligations of TRIPS can be waived with this vote, but like I've told you, it's highly likely, I think, that we'll end up getting to vote. Basically, the members have to agree to hold a vote, and I don't think the members would agree to hold a vote because, again, it would really undermine the underpinnings of the institution as it's operated for a very long time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, And Sir Bonnie, I'll should give you one final thought too, since I gave Melissa and Brian an opportunity to.
It's just that I'm very happy that this is, I mean, I don't know any other way to bring that science needs to be incentivized so that science keeps on contributing to the society. And at least up till now, it has been the patents. I'm extremely happy that I could show that all the companies, all the patent owning entities, they have done a lot of research, and we could connect these to what they have brought to the society. This is not only a win for them, it's a win for us. We are winning against the virus because of the science that is underlying there. And as a science enthusiast, I'm very happy about that. That's my ending note.
Well, thank you all. I thought this discussion was really a good one, and you know, it's a very heated, passionate discussion on both sides, and it's, I think, for the most part, I think everybody comes to it with the idea that they want to do good. They want the world to get cured from this terrible, unforeseen circumstance. They just have a different view of how that is going to happen best. So that's good news. You know, if you're looking for a silver lining, is, you know, humanity shines through, even though we may be yelling and screaming at each other as we disagree over how to accomplish this task. But I think in the short term here, we're going to get shots in everybody's arms around the world. And by this time next year, we'll be smiling and hugging everybody, and I can't remember the disagreements. So thank you, Melissa.
God's years, Gene.
Yeah, I know. I'm hoping, I'm praying. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you to our panel. I thought that was a fantastic discussion, and we look forward to you guys all joining us hopefully again in the future. So, but for now, that's all we have. Take care and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.